All right, welcome to the first of its kind, world-changing manufacturers network. Lisa Ryan has her ears to the ground and her heart in the game. Get ongoing education and new connections right here with Lisa and the Manufacturers Network. Buckle your seat, listen, and spread the word. Here's Lisa.
Hey, it's Lisa Ryan. Welcome to the Manufacturers Network podcast. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Ivan Madera. Ivan is a highly accomplished entrepreneur and visionary in the aerospace additive manufacturing industry with over 25 years of innovation in executive management consulting and advanced technical manufacturing strategy and implementation. His strong technical background encompasses work on both the consulting and operator sides, manufacturing, supply chain, and technology roles. So, Ivan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
So, share with us a little bit about your background and what led you to doing what you do.
Yeah. So, Lisa, I've been in advanced manufacturing for 25 years, the first 15 years of my career. I did large transformational projects in supply chain strategy, manufacturing. And then most recently, I would say the last 10 years, I founded Morph 3D, which was an advanced manufacturing engineering company focused on 3D printing for the aerospace and defense industry.
Okay. So what are you seeing as far as some of the leading technologies that are impacting the current state of manufacturing?
Yeah, definitely. There's a few things. There's an advent in interest and growth in advanced manufacturing to supply the aerospace and defense community, which was a huge part of with additive manufacturing in metal. So that's something that I've seen grow over the last 10 years. Have I seen it mature? Not necessarily to the state that we all thought 10 years back. The other thing I've seen from a trend perspective is the use of AI and robotics in manufacturing.
So why do you think what has led to this new resurgence that, like you said, it hasn't really matured yet, but it seems to be exponentially growing? So what is causing that?
Yeah, so I would say really closely, just if you follow the news, right? There's a lot of stuff going on, obviously, with a resurgence in industrial manufacturing stateside, where, I would say 10 years ago when I got into the industry, at least in supplying parts, we were supplying the aerospace and defense market. So it was necessary to build product in the US. And I didn't necessarily see a threat from a supply chain perspective for automotive or for the industrial market. Today, that landscape has completely shifted. In 2020, we naturally saw supply chains basically come under immense pressure, and folks started deploying new strategies for nearshoring. And nearshoring at a low cost would mean Mexico, Canada, or some of the partners that we have that we're doing trade with. Today, it's not a nearshore strategy, it's a onshore strategy. And that's something that is quite fascinating to me. I've had the luxury of spending the last 2 years refreshing myself and taking some time off. But every time I read articles or turn on the news, I see something that is really compelling for me. And we're still in the same spot. The supply chain industrial base is still struggling. Demand is getting much higher. We have basically a shifting kind of mandate from cost plus type structures from a contract standpoint to fixed cost. And a lot of that is going to put a lot of pressure on the industrial base to deliver goods and services within the US. And I have a lot of questions on how. We have a lot of issues with a labor force that is constrained, a talent pool that I would say is retiring, quite frankly, and there's not a backstop for that. So how do we get to an onshore strategy that's able to supply the aerospace and defense community, plus just the industrial, automotive, oil and gas, heavy industry, et cetera?
So you mentioned both nearshoring and onshoring. So what is the difference?
I would say nearshoring is a partner. So you can do it in Mexico was, I would say, a good nearshore type partner where you didn't have, I don't want to say the T word, high tariffs, a friendly country that you can do trade with at a lower cost. Canada, the same thing. It was a friendly country where we could do trade at a low cost. And now with the emphasis of doing things in the US, I think those strategies change. Imported goods, we just saw the latest news on auto tariffs, and we don't make 100% of the goods here in the US. So a lot of those components come from various sources and are assembled in plants outside of the US or within the US.
Okay. So what are you seeing as far as with onshoring? What needs to change so we can do more of that and not rely so much on other countries for that?
Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations about this lately, and I've seen a few things. One is I see manufacturing companies looking to bring on new technologies to help with overall productivity and effectiveness. That's one, but I think it comes down to the talent pool. We have a talent pool that is transitioning out, I would say. And as I mentioned earlier, there's no backstop. So how do you bridge the two? How do you take someone with decades of experience and transfer that level of experience to someone that's much younger or someone that doesn't have a skill at all? So we require what I see a lot of upskilling. And that's where I see the opportunity for the industrial base to leverage technologies like AI to be able to augment the existing basically users that are going to be left in manufacturing industry.
Yeah, that seems to be the problem that everybody is talking about because you do have the labor shortage, workers aging out, baby boomers retiring still at 8,500 a day, that is taking all that knowledge, skills, and experience with them, but also the history of the company and why those companies do what they do, and bringing in people that you said, like you said, are brand new to the industry, may not have any industrial background at all. So what have you seen as far as people who are successfully integrating not only the AI, how are they upskilling these newer people come so they can make a dent in the experience that we're losing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is when I ran my company, a lot of the young engineers we had were right out of school. And I spent a lot of time coaching and training and developing them and putting together basically a career path. And what was interesting is by doing so, the average tenure of my employee was 3.5 years, which is really high for someone coming right out of school. Today, a lot of those, I would say they're still kids. A lot of those kids are in management or in lead roles. That's a human element. That's a transfer of knowledge from a human to another human and putting the time into a development path so that they can have the skills necessary to charge forward. And I also put more experienced mentors. For example, I hired a guy that was the grandfather of heat exchangers for the aerospace industry, lots of experience, and getting to a point of retirement. And when I brought him in, he was like, "Why should I leave? I'm comfortable with where I'm at." And the question I asked him was, "What is going to be your legacy once you leave?" All right, because you've done something, you've developed your career, you've been super successful, but who are you passing down your knowledge to? So that was actually really compelling for him to say, "I've never thought of it that way." So imagine if you have an army of young, talented engineers coming alongside of you and taking that knowledge base forward and using the same kind of tools and mindset and strategies that you deployed to developing some of the leading edge heat exchangers for aircraft, et cetera. So that compelled them to join the team. Now, differences are one is paper, spreadsheets, and using your head, and younger engineers use software. So it's a completely different, it's like
Right.
two different worlds. One will Google and the other one will actually shorthand everything and figure it out. So how do you bridge that gap between that level of knowledge and experience with someone that's younger that wants to get there a lot faster? When I look at AI and why I started a new endeavor at Adaptive was, okay, that's interesting, but what if I took that level of expertise, because there's tons of documentation that has to be provided for these types of products. There's tons of requirements, specifications, flow downs from customers, right? And then design iterations. What if I can augment my early stage engineer with that level of information? So as he's designing, he's also getting prompted with different recommendations and considerations of history. Okay. So take that same engineer and there's a design review. In a design review, generally speaking, it's a bunch of people sitting around a conference room having a conversation on an engineering design. And as you move forward, I've probably designed some things, but some things have been left out. It's really typical. And it gets to a manufacturing engineer or it gets to the manufacturing floor and they encounter a challenge. That person is going to work through that challenge and continue to move things forward. It gets to quality and they see some things, but it's passable. And what I mean by that is I have work in process that's building up. So I have to continue my work. So the manufacturing engineer continues to do his little rework. It gets to quality. It's passable. It moves forward. But then it gets to assembly or integration or downstream. And you continue to encounter issues. So there's a loop that goes back and forth to the engineer. Sometimes you update the drawings depending on the amount of time necessary. And sometimes you live with it and you put a change order in place. Those change orders account to a lot of time, energy, and money, and a lot of waste. And when I think through these process and these iterations, I look at how can AI augment that? And a lot of that is history. So yes, I'm giving you a bunch of requirements and specifications and flow downs to educate you a little bit on how to engineer your product better. But what if I load that up with all the history from quality, from manufacturing, from integration, from assembly? I guarantee the errors that you had in process would likely go away because you're able to now observe what the engineer is doing and able to highlight the areas of concern based on history. So you're taking an engineer maybe 1-2 years out of school, and what I call them is a super engineer, right? With 10 plus years of experience. And that history is not lost. It's something that becomes front and center.
Well, so many things that you covered in that, starting with spending time with your new hires to develop a career for them, because they're looking at younger millennials and Gen Z coming into the workplace. They want to know where they're going to be. And they're probably not going to stay with you for 10 or 20 years like we usually, but like you said, 3.5 years, if you can get that out, and even then have those engineers work with the next generation coming in. But also the pen and paper versus the AI, of incorporating that into the newer generation, giving them the technology tools that they need and that legacy of experience on top of it that really helps them get up to speed so much faster. So it sounds like when you take the time to invest in your people from the beginning, you're going to get a lot more productive from them.
No, absolutely. And it's also just the way we work. I've been spending about 1.5 years on AI type tools, and I work differently. It's just, there's a lot of productivity. I can do things way faster than what I was doing in the past. Something that would take a couple hours is now literally done in minutes. So how do those two worlds collide so that you can attract younger talent in a manufacturing type environment to give them something that's interesting. These are tools that they're going to be way savvier on. Quite frankly, they're going to solve problems completely different. The danger in that is that there's no thought from a human standpoint. And so our tools, the tools that we're are developing, very aware of that, very aware of how people currently work. And the first phase of our deployment is really about observation and recommendation so that the user at the end can actually see a prompt of something that's about to take place so they can accept or reject it. But you're reading it, you're learning what's happening behind the scenes versus going to full automation where the tool actually does everything behind the scenes for you and you miss something of critical importance. So the idea here is it's a gate. You build a basis of trust, just like when you're doing that with a new client or in a relationship, you're building trust. And with any transformational type tool, you've got to start to trust it, but you've got to learn, okay, how's it thinking? Wow, that's an interesting response, or that's an interesting recommendation. Yes, I'm going to accept that because it's of low criticality. We've ranked those criticalities by low, medium, and high. And if you have a high risk type criticality where there's an impact from a financial standpoint, it actually flags the next user from an approval type standpoint. So we're trying to provide some levels of checks and balances with the tool that's doing a lot of thinking behind the scenes and potentially automating everything. But we want to just start with a level of augmentation and observation, right? And then you can turn off that recommendation button and then fully go automate. And that's going to come over time. That's not something that we would want our users to do day one. We want somebody to obviously learn, observe. Everybody's going back and forth and developing that level of trust with the system. And then tomorrow you can say, yeah, after 6 months or a year, you're going, okay, I can fully automate this function. And by doing so, you can do more with less. And I think that's the call that a lot of the DoD primes or companies that we've talked to is a mandate. We're being asked to do 10x with basically 10x demand in some instances. And how do you do that? Is it buying more CapEx? Is it hiring 10 more people? Is it buying 10 more buildings? Not necessarily. It's finding ways to become more efficient, more productive with the tools that you do have so that you can leverage some level of increase of X. And, but how do you, I think a lot of the conversations we've had is identifying where those roadblocks are at and the bottlenecks and the waste is part of this as well. So again, taking observations of history and trends using AI, all right? Not going through a bunch of paper of what happened in historical cases or root causes of potential failures in the past, but taking large sums of data and analyzing that to pinpoint specific areas where you can optimize, all right? And that's where I see tools like AI being of service to manufacturing companies to do more with less.
It sounds like there are some checks and balances in the system, but to make sure that right off the bat that we're not relying too much on the technology where it is fully automated. How do you have those kind of checks and balances and to let that newer engineer know that no, you still are going to have to think, you're still going to have to make decisions. We just have a legacy of data that you can base that on. But so again, so they can also learn and they can speed up the process that they need to get their careers on track.
That's correct. So I think we're looking at a couple things. One is the human interface, right, and augmenting the human. The other is obviously machines. You can learn a lot by observing machines, doing the machine learning, and then figuring out ways to automate certain functions. But on the human side, decisions are being made. And that's where I go back to forcing some level of criticality and recommendation and acceptance. And that's just, I would say that's governance from an AI perspective, is like you have the right type of rules, you have the right type of governance from certain users. I would say the same thing is true when I had our technicians running multi-million dollar machines. I didn't put a technician that was just hired, even if they said they had experience on this new machine. I literally had them train for 6 months. And my technicians had to literally shadow somebody. And the first thing that they had to know how to do very well was paperwork.
Yeah.
Traceability, especially in the aerospace industry. So we had to make sure that we had controls in place so that you don't just go off of some background knowledge or experience that you had somewhere else, because I don't know what practices you had. So I implemented these checks and balances to make sure that, hey, you graduated. You went from knowing how to collect the right type of data, make the right observations within the system. And all those things are really important because we didn't just put people in place and then said, go. Similar to AI, I'm creating a smart system that allows me to put those checks and balances in place before I say, go and trust what the system is doing. The good thing is, too, is we're spending a god awful amount of time with SMEs behind the scenes creating pre-trained models so that there isn't any bias or hallucinations, right, in the system. So there's still a human element to it. We still have to train the models. We still have to put some level of intelligence and thought, and it's going to get way smarter than us much faster. So the intent is, let me train you on good stuff. A lot of different what if scenarios, a lot of different workflow type scenarios, and how things would flow naturally within a manufacturing organization, types of constraints that you're going to see. Pre-training the models with that level of human intelligence will become super powerful out of the gate. But again, I think the control side is something that a lot of companies are going to need to take into consideration.
So what are some of the barriers that in adopting these emerging technologies in this space?
People.
Yeah.
This is, look, I did 15 years of management consulting and systems and what have you. And everyone back then was like, this thing's going to replace me. And it's not, right? It's going to help you do your job better. It's going to augment you so you can focus on other things that are of more importance. And the change management side is something that is super critical here. Any technology you're rolling out, whether it's a new piece of manufacturing technology or software or AI, it is a transformational type situation where humans have an emotion to it. They have an emotional reaction to, what is this thing going to do now for me? And how do I leverage it, or how do I push back so I don't have to use it? And so having executive leadership and sponsors is critical to deploying these types of technologies, but also having a mission or a vision as to why. Why is this important? So having that conversation with your employees or the user community as to the benefits, and then having an actual plan as to, okay, here are the benefits, but this is how it does change your role. Your role does change a little bit, and now you have some other things to focus on. So you're working on 2 or 3 different things at the same time that add value to the overall company.
And with everything that is going on in the news right now and all of that, what are you seeing as far as how are geopolitical conflicts influencing the need for more effective manufacturing processes?
Yeah, 100%. I had a conversation with a group from Europe and about a week ago, and there's a conversation about a roll-up of a series of small companies to supply the defense industry. And okay, that's really cool. Now, I ask questions around, hey, but you guys have a great technical base of machinists and trades and so on and so forth. And they're like, no, we have the same problems, if not worse, than the US.
Mm.
I found that fascinating. That geopolitical shift is, I don't think we're ever going to compete with China. That's just going to be, let's just say that's a fact, my opinion, but a fact for me. I think we can only manage. So if I look at the industrial base today, we have all the capacity, I believe, that we need. And people will say, what do you mean, Ivan? And I said, we're running single shifts. Many of my suppliers, which call it 100 or so in the past, we're all running a single shift. So that means that if I'm running a single shift, I'm running at a third utilization of an asset. By the time you put into setups and maintenance and everything else, you're probably in the low 20s, 20%-ish utilization of an asset in a single shift. And I go, the goal here is to figure out how to, again, find ways to automate some of those functions so that you can take a no-skill individual, upskill them with software and augmentation of some sort, and run a second and a third shift with that specific task. So do we need trained, skilled labor? Absolutely, of course, because they know how to do it, right? But if a system is trained on that's something that could be passed along to somebody that can come up to speed pretty quickly. When I look at our onshoring kind of debate and the things that we need to do, that's how we need to start looking at things. So how do you take a legacy enterprise and modernize them with the right types of tools?
Mm. So as we're getting to the end of our time together, if somebody did want to continue the conversation with you, how you work with organizations and what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yes, you can contact me at ivan@adaptive.am.
Okay. All right. And any final thoughts of things that we either didn't cover or just your head saying, oh, I need to leave this as my final thought or best practice?
Yeah, sure. Hold on. I'm going to just read one thing here.
Okay.
I think as we look at the future, we need to figure out ways to unlock the potential of that entire data set and history so that we can compete, number one, but also look at being an organization that has the fluidity and responsiveness of thought. And that's super impactful. And that's where, when I look at AI, that's what makes it super powerful is I have a thought. Type in the thought and I get a response. And that's where we need to be able to compete in the industrial base as we move forward.
Awesome. Ivan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Thanks for your time.
I'm Lisa Ryan, and this is the Manufacturers Network Podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Manufacturers Network Podcast. Do me a favor and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can grow this network and connect more fantastic folks just like you. You can either send your buddies to the website at manufacturers-network.com or share the Manufacturers Network podcast on your LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or wherever you and your industry friends hang out. The bigger and faster we grow the network, the stronger and deeper the community we'll all have. Thanks again, and I appreciate you.